You've seen the caveman, slouched, grunting, dragging a club, one dumb idea away from setting himself on fire. That's the picture in your head. Now look at an actual grave these people left behind. A boy and a girl laid head to head in the frozen ground of Russia, covered in more than 10,000 beads carved from mammoth ivory. Each bead took roughly 45 minutes to make by hand. Do the math on that grave alone and you're looking at over 10,000 hours of work for two dead children 34,000 years ago. That's not a grunting brute. That's someone who believed those kids were going somewhere and needed to be sent there properly. So here's the question that sounds almost too simple until you actually try to answer it. How did humans invent religion? Not which one. Not who's right. The stranger question underneath all of it. How did a brain that evolved to keep an ape alive on a dangerous savannah ever start believing in things it couldn't see, touch, or prove? Sit with that for a second, because the answer isn't what you guess. This goes back further than farming, further than writing, further than cities, than kings, than the wheel. This predates civilization itself, and there's a decent argument it predates our species. And the strangest part, the best evidence we have suggests nobody sat down and invented religion at all. It grew out of something already running inside your skull right now. Something that fired in you this morning without you noticing. And by the end, I want to show you that it's still there. But to understand any of it, you have to start before the gods, before the temples. You have to start with a snapping twig. Picture yourself 100,000 years ago. It's night. No fire or a dying one. The dark isn't the soft dark of a bedroom with a phone glowing on the nightstand. It's total, and it's full of things that eat you. And somewhere out in that black, you hear a branch snap. Now, what do? Here's the thing. You don't calmly consider whether it was the wind. You freeze. Your heart slams, and one thought arrives before any other. Something's there, not a probability, a certainty, someone. And here's why that instinct still runs your body today. Cognitive scientists have a name for it. Justin Barrett called it the hyperactive agency detection device, HAD for short. The idea is that your brain comes equipped with a trigger that's wildly biased toward assuming that ambiguous events were caused by an agent, something with intent, something alive. And it's hyperactive on purpose because the math of survival is lopsided. If the twig was just the wind and you panicked, you lost 3 seconds and some dignity. If the twig was a leopard and you assumed it was the wind, you're dead and you don't get the pass on your calm, reasonable genes. So we're all descended from the paranoid ones, the jumbie ones, the ancestors who saw face in every shadow and a hunter behind every sound. Read that again, because it flips the whole story. Religion may not have started with wonder or wisdom or staring up at the stars. It may have started with fear and a brain that would rather see 100 monsters that aren't there than miss the one that is. But an over-alert threat detector doesn't get you to gods on its own. It gets you to jumpiness. So here's where it gets stranger. Because your brain doesn't just detect agents, it's obsessed with what's inside them. You can't help but wonder what other people are thinking, what they want, what they intend. Psychologists call it theory of mind, and you run it constantly, effortlessly, every time you guess why your friend went quiet. Now bolt that onto the twig snap machine. You don't just sense a presence in the dark. You immediately start asking what it wants. Is it angry? What did I do? Can I make it happy again? And there it is. That's not a leopard anymore. That's the seed of a spirit. Pascal Boyer, one of the leading thinkers here, argues religion was never a special invention at all. It's a byproduct, a side effect of ordinary mental equipment doing exactly what it evolved to do, just aimed at the wrong target. The rustle in the grass, the disease that came from nowhere, the storm, the death, all of it gets a who behind it, a mind, an intention. Movies love to tell you early humans invented gods to explain thunder, like little scientists guessing wrong. That's backwards. They didn't reason their way to spirits. They felt their way there, because the machine that keeps you alive around other minds cannot stop seeing minds, even where there are none. So the capacity was there, deep, old, standard-issue human hardware. The question is when they actually started acting on it. And for that, we stop guessing about brains and start digging in the ground. Here's the problem with digging for religion, though. Belief doesn't fossilize. A prayer leaves nothing behind. A feeling of awe rots faster than the body that felt it. So how do you find the first flicker of the sacred in people who left no writing at all? You look for effort that makes no practical sense. You look for a group of starving, struggling humans spending precious time and energy on something that grows no food and kills no predator, because that wasted effort is the fingerprint of belief, and it's old. At Kafse Cave in Israel, humans were placing their dead in deliberately dug pits with red ochre and grave goods somewhere around 90 to 100,000 years ago. Think about what a burial actually is. A body doesn't need to be buried. Nature handles a corpse just fine on its own. Digging a grave, arranging the body, sprinkling it with red pigment the color of blood, leaving gifts, none of that helps a single living person survive. Every minute spent on the dead is a minute not spent hunting, and they did it anyway. That red ochre matters more than it looks. It shows up again and again in Neanderthal sites, on ground and shaped pieces worn down like crayons, sometimes tens of thousands of years apart, across groups that never met. And here's the honest part, we don't fully know what it meant to them. Nobody can. But the pattern is undeniable. Humans, and possibly our cousins, were staining the world red with meaning long before anyone could write down why. Then it escalates. Come back to that grave in Russia, the site called Songir, that 34,000-year-old double burial of the two children, buried head to head, blanketed in over 10,000 ivory beads, laid beside spears made from straightened mammoth tusks. Straightening a mammoth tusk is nearly impossible. It took soaking, heating, and enormous skill to make weapons placed with dead children who would never hunt. This isn't disposal. This is ceremony. This is a community that stopped everything for a very long time to say these lives meant something and they are not simply gone. You're telling me people we still call cavemen ran a full funeral economy with symbolic wealth and afterlife gifts and craftsmanship that would exhaust a modern artisan? Yes. Yes, they did. And they did it 30,000 years before the first city. Which raises the obvious next question. If the belief was already this deep, this organized, this expensive, what happens when you gather enough of these people in one place? For the longest time, the assumption was, nothing much, not until farming came along and gave people the surplus and free time to build big things and dream up gods. First you settle down, then you get civilization, then, eventually, you get temples. And then a hill in Turkey blew that order to pieces. The site is Göbekli Tepe, excavated by the German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt starting in 1994. Its oldest layers date to around 19600 BCE, roughly 11,600 years ago. That's about 6,000 years before Stonehenge. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some over 5 meters tall, some weighing up to 10 tons, carved with foxes and scorpions and vultures arranged in great rings on a hilltop. Now here's the part that rewrote the textbooks. There's no sign anyone farmed here. No sign anyone lived here full-time. The people who quarried, carved, hauled, and raised these 10-ton stones were hunter-gatherers, nomads. The exact people we were told couldn't possibly organize anything on this scale. Think about the logistics. Hundreds of people with no bosses, no writing, no wages, no agriculture, somehow coordinating to move megaliths. And someone had to feed that crew. Schmidt's famous line was, "First came the temple, then the city." His radical suggestion, it wasn't farming that made religion possible. It might have been the other way around. The need to gather, to build, to worship together, may have been part of what pushed people to settle down and start farming the wild wheat growing on the very hills around the site. Not the temple because of the city because of the temple. We touched earlier on effort being the fingerprint of belief. Göbekli Tepe is that fingerprint blown up to the size of a mountain. It's the moment the private feeling in one skull became a public monument that hundreds of hands would die building. But notice something about all of this. The dead, the ochre, the pillars. None of it needs a god who cares whether you lie or steal. These early spirits, judging from the spirit worlds of hunter-gatherers, mostly weren't moral referees. They were powerful, dangerous, present, but not especially interested in your ethics. So here's the real puzzle, and it might be the wrong question to ask how humans invented religion. Singular, because the religions you actually know, the watching, judging, rule-giving ones, are a second invention entirely. And that one has a reason. There's one last layer, and I saved it for the end, because it's the strangest turn in the whole story. For most of human history, in small bands of a few dozen, you didn't need a god to keep you honest. Everyone knew everyone. Steal, cheat, betray, and you were caught by dinner because 30 people missed nothing. The group was the watcher. But then the groups exploded. Villages became towns. Towns became cities of thousands of strangers. And anonymity, which barely existed before, became the enemy of cooperation. How do you trust a person you've never met and will never see again? What stops them from robbing you the moment your back is turned? The psychologist Ara Norenzian lays out a striking answer in his book, Big Gods. As society scaled up past the point where everyone could police everyone, the gods changed. They grew larger. They started watching. They started caring intensely about how you treated other people and punishing you when you failed. Norenzian's blunt summary of the psychology is this: watched people are nice people. A believer who feels an all-seeing eye on them behaves, even alone in the dark, because in their mind they are never truly alone. It's contested, and it's debated hard among his colleagues, but the pattern he points to is real. The biggest, most anonymous societies tend to run on the biggest, most moralizing gods, which means the punishing god in so many traditions may have been the invisible glue that let millions of strangers live side by side without tearing each other apart. Religion didn't just soothe the fear of death. It may have made the modern world physically possible. So, how did humans invent religion? They didn't. Not on purpose. It grew. It started with a brain built to see a hunter in every snapping twig, and a mind that couldn't stop asking what that hunter wanted. It moved into the ground the moment people began burying their dead in ochre and treasure because they refused to believe a person just ends. It rose into stone at Göbekli Tepe when belief pulled scattered nomads together and helped anchor them to one place. And finally, the gods opened their eyes and started to watch, because that was the price of living among strangers. A jumpy instinct, a grave, a temple, a watcher in the sky. Stack those four and you've built every faith that ever was. And here's the meaning underneath it. The thing that isn't bait. Religion isn't proof. Our ancestors were foolish. It's proof they were human in the deepest way we are. Pattern seekers, meaning makers, minds that stared into the dark and refused to accept that it was empty. Which brings us back to that dark room. That flicker down your spine when you're alone and suddenly certain someone's there. Nobody is. But your brain already decided. The same brain running the same ancient program that carved those beads and raised those stones. Every time you feel watched by nothing at all, you're feeling the very thing that built the gods. It never left. It's still in you.